Welcome to Sinister Tales, where every whisper hides a secret and every story leaves a shadow. If you're drawn to the darkest corners of true crime and mystery, you're in the right place. Subscribe now, because some tales were never meant to be forgotten.
It was just after dawn in South Fulton, Georgia, when the quiet of a suburban street was broken by the sound of sirens. Neighbors stepped out in confusion, still holding their morning coffee, as police cars lined the block outside a modest home where something unspeakable had just unfolded. Inside lay the body of a young mother, 29-year-old Corneisha Butler, a woman whose life had been defined by love, perseverance, and, in the end, unimaginable fear. The scene was chaotic yet hauntingly still. Officers moved cautiously through the house, their radios crackling as the reality began to sink in. Children's toys were scattered near the door. The faint scent of perfume lingered in the air. And somewhere between the chaos and the silence was a story, one of devotion turned obsession, of a system that saw the danger but failed to stop it. When word spread that Corneisha had been shot to death, the community's disbelief was instant. She was a mother of 4, loved by everyone who knew her. Her laughter, her energy, her determination to build a better life. But behind that warm smile, there had been months of terror, police reports, and desperate pleas for help. And the person accused of ending her life wasn't a stranger or a random intruder. It was the one who once claimed to love her. As investigators began piecing together the final hours of her life, what they discovered would shake the foundations of trust, justice, and protection. Because Corneisha had done everything she was supposed to do. She called the police. She filed restraining orders. She begged for help, but help didn't come fast enough. This is the story of Corneisha Butler, a mother who tried to escape, a system that hesitated, and a tragedy that now stands as a haunting warning for others. If you're new to Sinister Tales, make sure you hit subscribe, like, and share this video to help spread awareness about stories like Corneisha's. Stories that deserve to be told, not forgotten. And as we begin, ask yourself, how many more lives must be lost before the warnings are finally taken seriously? Before her name became a headline, before her home was sealed off with yellow tape, Corneisha Butler was simply a mother trying to hold her world together. She lived in South Fulton, Georgia, a city that still carries both the calm of suburbia and the heartbeat of Atlanta's chaos. She worked hard, smiled often, and was raising 4 children who meant everything to her. To those who knew her, Corneisha was strong-willed, kind, and protective, the kind of woman who would give her last dollar if it meant her children could eat or her friends could stand on their feet again. Her friends remember her laughter, her love for family, and her belief that even in heartbreak, people could change. But life hadn't been easy. Like many young mothers, she'd carried too much too soon, juggling bills, love, and survival in a world that often demanded all 3. When she met Shakyia Perkins, the woman who would later become her tormentor, it started the way so many stories of love begin, with charm, with promises, and with a connection that seemed to offer peace after years of struggle. At first, Shakyia appeared protective, even devoted. She called constantly, showed up unannounced, and showered Corneisha with attention that felt like affection. To an outsider, it looked like passion. To those closer, it soon began to look like control. The relationship was volatile, a mix of love and fear, kindness and threats. What began as romance slowly twisted into domination. Still, Corneisha believed in love's possibility. She thought if she showed loyalty, if she stayed patient, things might calm down. She didn't know that what she was really living inside was a countdown. A relationship already decaying from within, waiting for a spark that would ignite something far worse. Her story wasn't just about one bad decision or one dangerous partner. It was about a system that gives victims hope without power, about restraining orders that can't restrain rage. If stories like this move you, take a moment to like this video, subscribe, and share it. The more awareness we build, the more lives can be saved before another tragedy like this repeats itself. Because behind every headline like Corneisha's, there's always a person who just wanted to live. The warning signs began quietly, almost like background noise in the rhythm of Corneisha's everyday life. At first, she brushed them off. The constant phone calls, the jealousy, the sudden anger when she didn't answer fast enough. What felt like concern slowly grew into surveillance. Friends started noticing how her smile had changed, how she seemed nervous when her phone buzzed. She told them she was fine. But the truth was, fear had already moved into her home by late 2021. Police reports documented the growing pattern. Shakyia Perkins had followed her, rammed her car on a city street, and even tried to push her off the road. Corneisha filed a report, praying it would be enough to make it stop. But it didn't. Days later, Shakyia kicked in her front door, splintering the frame in a rage that neighbors would later recall as pure madness. Still, Corneisha stayed cautious but hopeful. She thought the law would protect her. She believed in the process. She believed in justice. Then came the fire. On September 25th, investigators say Shakyia torched 2 of Corneisha's vehicles and caused damage to her home. It was an escalation that screamed of obsession, not love, but possession. She wanted control, and she was willing to destroy anything to get it. Corneisha began saving screenshots of threatening messages, evidence she thought would keep her safe. One text read, "Soon you will be dead, and I'll be in jail, and that's fine." Another said, "I'm going for first degree, not second. Stamp that." Each message was a cry for help disguised as proof. Proof she was living with a predator. She filed restraining orders, begged authorities for protection, and tried to rebuild some sense of peace for her children. But like too many domestic violence victims, her pleas met bureaucracy and delay. Shakyia was arrested more than once and each time released on bond. Every system designed to save her gave her just enough hope to believe she'd survive, but not enough to guarantee it. That if you're watching this, take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Sinister Tales. Every click helps bring stories like Corneisha's to light. Stories that remind us danger often doesn't wear a mask. Sometimes, it sleeps beside you. It was a Wednesday morning in November 2022, and the city of South Fulton was just waking up. The air was still, the kind that carries an uneasy calm before a storm. Corneisha Butler's neighbors noticed her lights were still on long after midnight, but no one imagined what those final hours inside her home would become. Behind closed doors, fear had finally met its breaking point. According to investigators, Shakyia Perkins had spent weeks obsessing, sending threats, and watching Corneisha's every move, her work, her home, her children's routines. Then, in the early hours of November 16th, that obsession turned deadly. Police believe Perkins arrived with a gun, breaking into the home she once claimed as love's refuge. In a matter of seconds, the life of a young mother who had fought so hard to be free was stolen. Gunfire shattered the silence, echoing through the walls that had once held laughter, bedtime stories, and the chaos of motherhood. When officers entered the home, they found a scene that would haunt even the most seasoned detectives. Corneisha's body lay motionless, her children nearby, terrified and crying. The home was filled with the aftermath of rage, the kind that leaves no room for remorse. Neighbors stood outside in disbelief as police tape fluttered in the morning wind. One mother, for children, and a crime that was not only brutal but predictable. Hours later, news broke across Georgia. Mother of 4 killed by her ex-girlfriend despite restraining orders. The story shocked those who thought domestic violence had a single face, a single gender, a single pattern. But this tragedy proved otherwise. It was about control, not gender, not orientation, just control, pure and corrosive. The woman who had once promised love had now delivered death. If this story already feels heavy, take a second to subscribe, like, and share this video. Someone out there needs to hear it. Someone who might still have time to walk away before it's too late. As police began piecing together the evidence, they realized this was no sudden act of rage. It was the final chapter in a pattern of obsession that had been building for months. And while the gunshots ended one life, they exposed a larger failure, one that could no longer be ignored. When the call came in, the dispatcher's voice was calm, but the scene waiting for officers was anything but. The moment police crossed the threshold of Corneisha Butler's home, they knew this wasn't a robbery gone wrong or an act of random violence. This was targeted, personal, the signature of someone who had made a promise and kept it. A deadly one. Detectives immediately began reconstructing the final hours. They combed through phone records, text messages, and surveillance footage. What emerged painted a portrait of deliberate planning. Shakyia Perkins had been circling Corneisha's neighborhood days before the murder. Her car appeared on multiple cameras, idling near intersections, headlights off, waiting. Investigators traced the threatening messages, the deleted calls, and the chilling voice notes that spoke of revenge. It wasn't impulsive. It was preparation. When police tracked Perkins down, she didn't vanish into hiding. She was found less than 24 hours later, calm, detached, her silence colder than her crime. Inside her vehicle, officers discovered the weapon used in the killing, a handgun registered under her name, and a phone still loaded with the very messages that predicted this ending. Every digital trace became a breadcrumb leading straight back to her. Forensic teams documented everything: the trajectory of bullets, the shattered glass, the fingerprints that lingered on the doorknob. Each photograph told the same story, that Corneisha had fought for her life, and that every warning she gave had been true. The restraining order she filed months before was found folded neatly on her nightstand. It was a haunting symbol of how close protection had come, yet how far it still was. As detectives briefed the media, they didn't hide their frustration. This was a crime that could have been prevented. The suspect had 4 active domestic violence cases pending at the time of the murder, 4 opportunities for intervention. But each time, the system opened its door just wide enough for her to walk back out. If you're watching, take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Sinister Tales. Every view helps expose how easily these patterns repeat, and maybe, just maybe, help someone recognize danger before it strikes. Because Corneisha's case wasn't about one woman's rage. It was about how silence, delay, and disbelief can become accessories to murder. The courtroom was heavy with silence, the kind that feels alive, pulsing with grief, anger, and disbelief. On one side sat Corneisha Butler's family, their eyes hollow from months of tears. On the other, the woman once called her lover, now her killer, Shakyia Perkins, dressed in a pale jail uniform, expression blank. Between them stood the weight of a story that never should have reached this room. Prosecutors laid out a timeline of obsession turned execution. They showed the texts where Perkins promised to kill. They presented photos of the burned cars, the damaged doorframe, the screenshots of threats. Jurors heard about the restraining orders ignored, the bonds granted despite escalating violence. Every piece of evidence screamed the same truth: this was premeditated. It wasn't passion. It wasn't self-defense. It was vengeance, cold and deliberate. The defense tried to argue emotional instability, that Perkins had lost control, that her actions were fueled by heartbreak and mental distress. But the jury didn't see heartbreak. They saw obsession sharpened into intent. They saw a woman who had made a choice again and again to destroy what she couldn't control. When the verdict came, the judge's voice was steady: guilty of first-degree murder, possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony, and cruelty to children. Each word cut through the courtroom like a blade. For Corneisha's mother, it wasn't victory. It was closure dressed as loss. The punishment would never bring her daughter back. Perkins showed little reaction as she was sentenced to life in prison. The same quiet intensity she once used to terrorize was now replaced with stillness. But for those in the courtroom, the silence wasn't peace. It was reminder. Because justice, even when served, feels hollow when it arrives too late. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered around Corneisha's family. They spoke softly about her kindness, her strength, and her faith, about how she deserved protection, not memorials. They hoped the system would learn from her death. But deep down, they knew this wasn't the first time someone had warned, begged, and still died waiting. If you believe stories like this must keep being told, hit subscribe, like, and share this video so her voice doesn't fade. Every time you do, you push her memory one step further into justice, and one step away from being forgotten. Because the gavel may have fallen, but the echoes of this case still linger. In every courtroom, every police report, every woman still waiting for help that may not come. The weeks after the sentencing, South Fulton was wrapped in quiet grief. Balloons, candles, and framed photos marked the front yard of the home where everything had ended. Strangers drove by just to stop and sit in silence, as though their presence could somehow fill the void left behind. The laughter that once poured from that doorway was gone, replaced by the low hum of memory, the sound of neighbors still asking how something like this could happen to someone who did everything right. Corneisha Butler's family spoke softly when they finally faced the cameras. Her mother's voice trembled as she described her daughter's last months, the fear in her tone when she called late at night, the way she tried to sound strong so her kids wouldn't see her cry. Friends remembered her as sunlight in a storm, a woman who fought to keep her children safe even while she was being hunted. At vigils, people prayed for her soul, for her children's healing, and for a justice system that wouldn't let another woman slip through the cracks. The community rallied behind the family, organizing fundraisers, offering counseling, and demanding legislative change. Victims' advocates began using Corneisha's name when pushing for tougher domestic violence reforms, more monitoring for repeat offenders, stricter bond conditions, faster enforcement of restraining orders. Her death had become a mirror reflecting society's slow response to private terror. Online, her story spread far beyond Georgia. Thousands shared her photo, smiling, radiant, alive, alongside the plea, "Believe them the first time they say they're afraid." Each post became a digital vigil, each share a small act of remembrance. But for her 4 children, remembrance wasn't enough. Their world had been rewritten, no longer by bedtime stories, but by the memory of flashing lights and the echo of a gunshot they'll never forget. The community promised to stand with them, to make sure their mother's name meant more than tragedy. If her story has moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to Sinister Tales. Every time this story is told, it honors Corneisha's fight, her love, and her voice. A voice that might save someone else still trapped in silence. Because behind every candle lit in her name burns one truth. She warned them. They didn't listen. And now, it's on all of us to make sure the next one is heard. As the months passed, Corneisha Butler's story began to fade from headlines, swallowed by new tragedies and breaking news cycles. But in the quiet corners of South Fulton, her memory lingered. A reminder written into the air of every courtroom, every emergency call, every whispered warning that comes too late. Her name became more than a case file. It became a question, one that every viewer of this story must now confront. How does a system fail someone who did everything right? Corneisha followed every step society tells victims to take. She reported the abuse. She filed restraining orders. She called for help. But when the door finally broke down, when the fire burned her cars, when the threats came in messages clear as daylight, no one stopped the inevitable. The law saw the danger but not the urgency. And because of that delay, for children lost their mother, and a community lost its faith in protection. Her story forces us to see that domestic violence doesn't always wear a familiar face. It doesn't always come from a man, and it doesn't always look like bruises. Sometimes, it hides behind love letters, shared photos, and promises that turn to fear. It's the quiet violence, psychological, emotional, and persistent, that kills long before the first blow or bullet. Corneisha's legacy is now a lesson written in grief. Her family continues to speak her name, not in anger, but in hope that her story saves someone else. Because in every city, there's another Corneisha, someone filing that same report, whispering those same fears, waiting for help that might not come fast enough. If you believe stories like this matter, if you believe awareness can save lives, take a moment right now to share, and subscribe to Sinister Tales. Turn on notifications so you never miss the stories that need to be heard. Because silence is the greatest accomplice of all. And if Corneisha Butler could speak to us now, her words would echo like a warning in the dark. Don't wait until it's too late to believe someone's fear. So tonight, as her candles flicker out across Georgia, ask yourself, how many more victims will cry for help before someone finally listens?